So, Adam, I was recently on Quora and was reading through this thread that was about military secrets. One of them particularly was get this Sasquatch research program, which
I love
allegedly has
it.
been around in the government since like the
Allegedly.
1960s, allegedly. Well, you can always believe what you read on the internet. By the way, I do. And it is.
True.
Okay. But now, if you can't believe what you read on the internet, you can believe what comes out of a veteran's mouth, right? And Barbara Tanny, a retired Army nurse, said, and I quote, and this was on Quora, there are some unusual accounts of beings described as Bigfoot and an array of other unusual beings during the Vietnam War in the deepest, darkest, most dangerous parts of the jungle. After the Vietnam War ended, she said, things started getting quieted down, and the US government got permission from the Vietnam government to investigate some of these sightings. They saw animals that had never been reported before or cataloged. There were others that were thought to be extinct. The village people stated that they may have caught glimpses of these animals at the jungle's edge, but not a really good look. One that was repeatedly reported was a race of humanoids known locally as, and I'm going to totally murder this, Gui Rung, or people of the forest, also known as the Batutut or the Ujit. They were described as being very hairy, ape-like, reddish hair, very muscular, and about 5 foot tall. There are no apes in Vietnam, in case you were wondering, Adam. They were seen by both American troops and the Viet Cong. They were dubbed rock apes because they threw rocks at the soldiers. I can't imagine if Vietnam wasn't sucky enough. Can you imagine getting rocks chucked at you by some like humanoid? Not exactly Bigfoot, but they grew another 3 foot, and you might have a sighting. So, Adam, what do you think? Do you believe
Well,
Nurse Tanny?
I thought for a second there when you said very hairy, ape-like, reddish hair, muscular, but then you said 5 foot tall because I was thinking about our co-host Joe, who's not here. But
Yeah.
no. But then I said no, he couldn't be. He's much taller than that. No, I
Well,
don't
he may
know.
be doing reenactments in Vietnam. That's probably where he's at right now.
That's it. They actually spotted Joe in Vietnam and have
He time
confused
traveled
this with
back.
some kind of Sasquatch character. So, I don't this is I've never heard of this before. I've never heard of Sasquatch in Vietnam. This is wild.
Yeah, this is pretty
I
cool.
like the part where the US government got permission from the Vietnam government to investigate some of these sightings. So just like
Can you
there's an
imagine that
official
pitch? Yes.
like, look, you know it and we know it, so we got the resources. Let's go in there and figure out what this squatching nonsense is.
We're tired of these rocks getting chucked at us by these.
Yeah, so I think it's truth, just
I
from that part alone.
truth. And we will ask Joe when he's back after the next couple of episodes. In the
From
meantime,
Vietnam. Yeah.
yeah, from Vietnam. Alpha, stick around. Let's get this show started.
This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Welcome, Alphas. We have a special treat for you today. For those of you who are fans of the paranormal, the fantastical, and the downright frightening, former Army intelligence officer R.C. Bramhall is also the author of Haunted War Tales, True Military Encounters with the Bizarre, Paranormal, and Unexplained. We'll talk to him about some of these tales that will give you the heebie-jeebies. Probably not Joe, though. But before we venture down that road into the paranormal, Adam, I think you have an update for us on the efforts to get FDA approval of MDMA-assisted therapy. Take it away.
Yeah, that's right. There was a big meeting last week and a lot of advancements here with respect to just outcomes on some big questions that we had on the way forward for some of these therapies. So a panel of advisors to the Food and Drug Administration recommended against the use of midomethamphetamine or MDMA in conjunction with therapy which has gained momentum in the veteran community, the committee voted 10-1 against the overall benefits of MDMA in the treatment of PTSD. And this happened on June 4th, last Tuesday, as of when we're recording. But the committee called into question the efficacy of the research presented to the FDA and claimed it was flawed and could have skewed the results. Several raised concerns over missing follow-up data on patient outcomes and a lack of diversity in the trial group. So as many of you know, and I've talked about it from time to time, I'm part of a coalition of organizations that's working on this. And my boss is Lieutenant General Martin R. Steele, USMC retired. And he put out this statement in conjunction with our organization, VMHLC and Reason for Hope. So I wanted to take a minute to read it because I think it really quite accurately kind of describes the sentiment, what's at stake here, and what this kind of means in the way forward. So this is Lieutenant General Martin Steele and Reason for Hope Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition. We are profoundly disappointed by the FDA Advisory Committee's vote against approval of MDMA for use with therapy to treat PTSD. Unfortunately, the committee completely lost sight of the big picture amidst a novel and complex application. It's hard to describe how tragic and heart-wrenching this vote was for so many of our veterans who have been on the front lines battling for more research and compassionate use access to this treatment. Indeed, we lose 17 to 44 veterans every single day to deaths of despair, such as suicide or overdose, often resulting from unresolved trauma in service to this country, and the problem only seems to be getting worse. Despite rates of PTSD and suicide increasing for decades, we have seen little progress with new treatments, including no new FDA-approved drugs for PTSD in over 20 years. Considering the clear limitations of currently available medications, such as SSRIs and talk therapies, MDMA offers a seemingly obvious and logical approach to treating PTSD. The drug's ability to rapidly establish therapeutic rapport and reduce fear response makes it easier to commit to and engage in psychotherapeutic process that involves confronting often highly traumatic memories. So it's a lot to unpack there, but I think it does a good job of trying to put this in context. We'll have a link to the show notes and some other links where you can read more about this. But I think at the end of the day, it's a recommendation that's going to be made by this committee to the FDA, and the FDA is actually going to vote on it and approve, make their decision, I think, on August 11th. And so whatever this committee recommends, if they recommend yes for a drug, normally 90% of the time, that drug will get approved. However, about 30% of the time, even if they recommend it not to get approved, the FDA still approves it. So ultimately, while it's disappointing, there's still more work to be done. And I think this is something new. It's kind of undefined in Western medicine. So we're working on bringing this along the right way and helping to answer these questions so that we can get what we need for the veterans. So it's a little bit long to digest all that, but now you have the truth and the most up-to-date information and perspective on it.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, Alphas, make sure you keep the lights on, because right after this break, we're going to be back with R.C. Bramhall, author of Haunted War Tales. Here we go.
Talking about suicide is hard, but the American Legion has joined forces with Columbia University to develop training for those who want to learn more about interacting and responding to veterans who may be in crisis. American Legion Be the One training. In the 90-minute class, you'll learn to understand the types of suicidal ideation and 4 behaviors that indicate imminent risk, how to use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale to determine at-risk individuals, how to identify risk factors and warning signs, and how to communicate effectively with individuals who may be at risk of hurting themselves. Online and in-person sessions are available. Visit betheone.org/training to find a session. Learn the skills that'll give you the confidence to talk about suicide and be the one to save just one veteran.
Today we are joined by R.C. Bramhall. R.C., welcome to Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a huge honor to be, anything with the American Legion, having been a member
Awesome.
for almost 19 years.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you, RC. I'm looking forward to hearing more about your book. And for the listeners, you got an awesome kind of poster backdrop. So your book is Haunted War Tales, True Military Encounters with the Bizarre, Paranormal, and Unexplained. And I know Stacy's really excited to dive into all this. But
Awesome.
before we get to that, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background? Anything you want to share about your time in the service? And I guess kind of leading up to the book, did you know that you were always going to be a writer even while you were in the military? Is that something you were doing, kind of journaling and stuff, or is it just something that completely kind of came about afterwards? So
It's interesting that you say that, because kind of the two things that I knew I wanted to do in life from the time I was pretty young was be a soldier and be a writer. So definitely, even when I joined the Army, part of it was just to gain those experiences, just to have more experiences to be able to draw back on. But I'm originally from like Western Pennsylvania, small town outside Pittsburgh. Joined the Army right out of high school, delayed entry. I had a cousin that was a Green Beret, so had a pretty big influence on me, I'm sure. So joined in '88, served till '92, and then 2 more years, about 2.5 years in the National Guard. So I was mainly with 5th Infantry Division out of Fort Polk, and then 20th Special Forces Group was the National Guard unit out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, my last duty station was Fort Polk, and I also say like a major contributing reason to why I got out. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah,
It was known as the armpit of the Army, right? Back when I was
that's right. Yeah, the
As I
Army
always
has a great.
the drinking age was 18 in Louisiana then, so it kind of made up for it, as a young recruit.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wow.
No, that's great. Stacey was in the Air Force. So they get better duty stations, and then the Navy always gets a great beach. But the Army, you're pretty much guaranteed to, for the most part, to be at like a really cheap piece of land in the middle of nowhere that they got a good deal on.
Well,
No
at least
doubt.
there's going to be some really good pawn shops right outside the gate
That's right.
and some like titles for loans kind of place. Yeah.
No doubt. Payday loans, too much
That's
of a problem.
yeah.
Many members' lives, right?
So did you keep, so how did you kind of document, these experiences, and not leaning too far, but just kind of focus in on the time while you were in the military? What is that like when you're, your infantry, your special forces, and you're getting to go and do all these like cool trainings, cool experiences, but then are you like a journal in the morning kind of guy? Do you even do that? Are you just retrospectively, pulling from these experiences? What was kind of a process that you began to develop at that time?
Yeah, just always collecting and, relating to this book. I've just always been into that mashup, horror war, going all the way back to like DC Comics when I was growing up. Had a comic called Weird War that was literally like anthologies of like different horror stories set during different time periods, but it was always like in war and combat. So that had a major influence on me. And I just always like mysteries, just anything strange. I try not to believe in anything, but keep an open mind about everything. And honestly, just kind of, even with this book, I collected all these stories and kind of leave it up to you, present the evidence, and then let you decide what you want to think about it. Go ahead.
No, would you categorize yourself more as a historian then, who just happens to have a paranormal? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a history buff and love history. And even my point in writing this, if you'll learn a lot from it too, because I kind of, there's so many stories from so many international different wars and places that I try to, give a little background to for the reader to know about that conflict or that place that it occurred in.
I have to admit, my husband always pokes fun at me because I am one of those. You said you're not a believer, but you keep an open mind. I am a believer.
Okay.
And I listen to podcasts, and I will, when I have time, watch television shows like Ghost Hunters and, anyway,
Sure.
I'm all about it. So when I saw you were going to be our guest today, I was like, yes, this is right up my alley. Tell me, did you ever have any experiences when you were a kid, or what kind of sparked that interest go down that road?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I've had a few strange things happen to me, but nothing while I was in uniform for sure.
Hmm.
Now I was in intelligence, so I worked like G2 level, and then S2 with the infantry battalion, tank battalion. The special forces was a military intelligence detachment. So every once in a while you get some bizarre reports of things, whether it be unidentified aircraft or some type of cryptid type of thing, the Sasquatch stuff. But my time in the military, really, the only strange stuff I was kind of exposed to was like the Army psychic warfare program,
Hmm.
just in
Mm.
that. So that kind of piqued my interest for sure. Um, but my goal with this was really to find new stories, things that people haven't heard before. And then also, no one's really collected all the new lore and legends from Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm real proud of that fact. It's kind of like the first collection of all this new, mythology and stories that are out there.
Well, I mean, gosh, it was the cradle of civilization in Iraq, so I imagine there's got to be some
There's a lot,
creepy crawly
yes.
kind of. Can you share one that you found most interesting that would be worth
So where would you like to go? We got hauntings, we got cryptids, we got
hauntings? I know our super producer Holly would want to know about the Sasquatch, but I want to know about paranormal.
one of the creepiest places is Abu Ghraib, the
Mm.
prison, right? The soldiers who serve there talk about just the atmosphere of that place, the oppression, the bad feelings. Um,
Mm.
the people I've found local, like newspaper articles, and the people who live there to this day, like the neighborhood, claim that it's haunted. Like at night, things knock on their doors, their pets act strange, that their kids wake up and hear voices, and so they can't even sell homes in the area surrounding the prison. So I found that pretty interesting. And then I got an account of an officer who went there and just kind of went through a tour after we had started occupying, but kind of before we started loading it up with prisoners. And he has a couple pictures of orbs and things, and he's not the only one. Like a lot of people that go there, they'll have photographs of all these different places, and then around like that area that was known as Saddam's death house, where all the torture
Mm.
took place and the killings, there's always like strange anomalies and photographs there and what people experience.
It's interesting. I wonder if it's like, that idea of like calls to like.
For
So,
sure.
obviously prison's going to be housing some pretty bad characters. And
Yes,
I
and a
wonder
lot
if
of
that draws
suffering.
out, yeah, if that draws out even more wickedness. You know what I mean?
That's one of my personal theories, is like these places. I don't necessarily believe it's like a spirit that's retained there. It's almost like an energy imprint, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which isn't that hard to believe because science is starting to prove how we, like mental thoughts do produce some kind of, action sometimes, right?
Mhm.
Just that idea that emotions can leave an impression somewhere. And it's almost like we're experiencing like a loop of that event sometimes that we can perceive. That's kind of the way I take a lot of these hauntings, that it's not necessarily a spirit haunting, but it's like a place that's absorbed this energy that's always going to be there. And that sometimes we see it or experience it for different reasons.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One of the most remarkable stories in the book, and one of the most convincing hauntings I've ever come across, is OP Rock, Observation Point Rock in Afghanistan. And it
Hmm.
has a long history, going all the way back to Alexander the Great because of the strategic kind of location overwatching this valley. Any occupying army that's come through has used it. So it's got this long history. And even going back between the Soviet-Afghan war, it was the spot of like a mass burial of a bunch of Afghan policemen, like 80 some bodies. So when our Marines moved in there and kind of took this observation point over, there was a British unit there that was there before, and I found some stuff while they were there from English newspapers that they experienced a lot of the same things. So when our Marines arrived, I kind of told them like, hey, don't dig here. And if you do dig and you find anything, put it back. Because what was happening as they started to dig in, being infantry, digging the trenches deeper and making fortifications, they started to realize that they were on a top, on a pile of bones It was a mass burial, and they just
Mm.
started finding femurs and skulls, and so the hauntings slowly started to get worse and worse. And what's so convincing about it is that almost every guy in the squad, says these things happen. And it seems like it was Russian, like Russian haunting, like they would
Really?
hear
Like a
Russian
Russian
voices.
ghost?
Yeah, they would hear Russian voices. And then the craziest thing was one night they all woke up and literally thought they were being attacked. They all heard RPGs incoming. They heard gunfire. They all jump up, get to their battle stations, light it up, and there's nothing there. Nothing's going on. And they
Wow.
all woke up. They all heard these noises. And that was one of the final events before they left and shifted out.
So did
So
any anthropologists ever do any testing on the bones to figure out?
not that I'm aware of, but the locals, consistently told them, like, hey, you don't want to be there. Like, it's a bad spot. We avoid it. There's there's even a Muslim shrine in the area, so there's already kind of a supernatural vibe to the whole place. And so this just added to it. But yeah, it's a neat story.
So for an event like that, like what are they filing in a report, and it gets put into an intelligence report, and then it exists in that like capacity, or is that just kind of something where it's more like we're not really telling that to anybody? We're
Exactly,
just keeping...
yeah, because you know how it is. They don't want to get that stigma that they're crazy or trying to get
Yeah.
out of their assignment. And actually, that's what happened to one of the guys in the squad. Was he was so freaked out he requested a transfer. And the rest of the guys in the unit were mad at him, thinking he was trying to get out of duty and leave them behind. And after he left, then it started happening to another guy, the same exact. So then, it started, oh boy, okay. He was right. There was something going on.
Well, something you said is kind of like the emotional signature or the energetic, signature of the emotion or whatever, transpired there. And I think, but that's like looking at something that's, maybe haunted or something that happened in the past, right? But then there's like active things also, right? Or things that we at least perceive to be happening, in real time. And so,
Yes.
maybe like one of the easiest ones is just, just kind of like to throw it into the bucket of like aliens. And so like, what might your position be on something like this? Because, my perspective, like growing up, if you're like, yes, aliens and UFOs, you were just a weirdo. It's like,
Correct.
that's stuff of movies, and that's only, for Independence Day and Will Smith. And, but now it's like, look, man, like there's congressional hearings where fighter pilots are revealing the unmanned aerial phenomenon characteristics that defy the laws of physics as we know it. And you're like, hold on, man, like we're talking about this in the halls of Congress. What's really happening and going on, and what are we seeing?
No doubt, things have changed dramatically in the last few years, with so much of that coming out. And I think the result, even for this book, like a lot more guys are willing to talk about some of this stuff because it is becoming more acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
That enough, legitimate like organizations are starting to verify that these things are going on. Now, as far as aliens, UFOs, I avoided that whole thing because
Yeah.
it's so much, and there's so many other books about that. So I did avoid that for sure. But yeah, my personal thoughts on it, there's something going on. I mean, there's no doubt. There's too much stuff happening.
Well, even applying that, principle and respecting that there's volumes of that stuff, and wanting to provide a richer context and deeper insights, especially as it tied to the military side. Like, what are maybe some of the things that have happened that are like really bizarre, or like bizarre stories?
Well, I mean, going back to, like cryptids, right? Because again, like a lot of people only think that like Sasquatch is a North American thing, but it's a worldwide phenomenon. And in fact, it's
Hmm.
like different types of creatures. In Russia, we have what's called an Alma that's more human-like, almost like a Neanderthal type species. And I have Russian military reports going all the way back to like their Civil War. Japanese troops in World War II encountered some hominins in Guadalcanal on the Solomon Island giants they call them. So it's just interesting. Like in Afghanistan, again, like the locals, it's kind of like our indigenous here in North America. Like hey, we don't really care if you believe in them or not. We know they're there. we've always accepted that as kind of part of life. That there's these people in the mountains and they come down when times are hard, and otherwise they kind of leave us alone, and we respect that. I've even got like local reports of how they interact with them and things. So there's several reports from Afghanistan of, heat signatures of things, so something was there. And the size, the size of these things, their guys report are almost impossible when they see these things moving. Couple reports like that. And when you think about it, right, some of the areas we're going into during combat or, searching for the enemy are places that people are not going. They're the most like remote, inhabitable places in the world. And not only are we going there and looking for something, but we're using cutting edge technology, right? Like the best technology to try to locate things. So I feel like it's almost, it goes hand in hand that we are getting these strange reports of things that don't make sense because we're looking at places more intensely than we ever have before too.
Yeah, that's crazy. I wonder, like, you kind of talked a little bit about findings, like, but maybe touch a little bit about how you find these stories, how you validate them. Are you going to these locations? Are you getting linked up with service members who are on record about it? Like, how do you go
Yes.
finding
Yes,
these?
for sure. That was one of my, like kind of to pass the test of using the story in the book, there had to be some legitimacy to it that I could verify that unit was definitely at that location, that the people were willing to give their names, right? Because anyone can make an anonymous report and say whatever, right? I mean, there's no connection to it, so you could say whatever. So I try to avoid as much of those as possible, and even debunked a few things, a few conspiracies that are out there and stories that you hear, which was real fun to do because it shows, again, just in this modern age, how people just take a story and they accept it without ever really looking at where does that photograph come from, or where is this place actually at. So yeah, actually, I wanted to just reference, because one of the stories in the book is from the American Legion magazine, a story from September 1993, and it was called The Ghost Plane from Mindanao. So it's a World War II story. But I use that story to illustrate how sometimes the truth is actually more insane and, crazy sounding than anything supernatural we come up with. So if you don't mind, I'll try to do it real quick. I'll tell you
Yeah,
that
I would love that. Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's great.
So it was World War II, and like the Army Air Force guys that were stationed in China, they get this, alert that an incoming aircraft's coming out of enemy territory. So they fly up and they see this thing, and the first thing they realize is like this plane is like out of the past. It's got old Army Air Force insignia on it from like World War One. It's a type of aircraft that's not really used anymore, right? Then when they're checking it out, like there's no landing gear on it. So it's like, how did it take off? It's all, it's ripped apart, it's shot up. And then they see the pilot, it looks like he's dead, but he's still flying in a straight line, like the way he obviously collapsed on the stick. The plane's flying straight. So they see this thing, kind of circle it a few times. They don't know what to think, Is this like a ghost? Like it came out of enemy territory too, so there was no base it could have came from, right? So all those factors, they've, go back down, and it became the legend of the ghost plane, this ghost pilot flying this aircraft forever. So years and years later, this guy at a reunion of some of these, different pilots, things from World War II, kind of brings up this ghost plane, and one of the guys in attendance was like, I know that plane. Like, I know the story of where that plane came from. And he starts to interview this guy, and sure enough, it was like what was it, the Flying Tigers? Was that the group of pilots that went early in World War II? I think the Flying Tigers was their name. So they were en route to, go and fly, meet up in China and, fly aircraft on missions. Their boat, basically, they got shipwrecked, and they hit an island, Mindanao, in the Philippines, and were shipwrecked there, and basically started to live off the land and kind of, create their own unit. And so they would use like scavenged aircraft. They rescued some off the ship. And basically what they had was these old aircraft that had been packed on this ship. That's why it was an outdated aircraft with outdated insignia. And they used these things and started flying missions. And eventually they got down to their last plane, and, they decided to use it to kind of send it out on a rescue mission. So they didn't have any landing gear. So they built this like bamboo, like rigged up a landing to get it off the ground. And then the pilot could basically like cut it off so that it, wouldn't affect the aircraft. They took all like the extra stuff off it, added a gas tank so it could like double its range. And he flew off to China, like in search of the closest American units to try to, get them to rescue them. So obviously at some point that pilot was killed and that plane, kept flying. And, that's just one of those examples of how like a story can seem so insane. But then when you find the truth, that's even wilder, right?
That's crazy. So wait, maybe I missed it. Where did this ghost plane get intercepted?
In China.
In China. Okay.
Yep.
All right. I was
coming
thinking
from,
like over Alaska
Japanese,
or something like that's a
No,
long
and it was coming
flight.
from like Japanese airspace, so that's why they thought it was an incoming enemy craft. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Wow. That's pretty cool. I'm going to have to go back and look up that ghost plane article in the American.
Yes. September 1993. It was issue 135.
Okay, cool.
Oh, that's cool.
Look that up.
So as far as like when you're going and researching these stories and stuff like that, I mean, what's the actual like, process, for that one, or, pick any other, like, do you have, you're trying to go out there and find any kind of firsthand witnesses, then you pair that with any kind of photographic video evidence, and then is there like any kind of scientific instrument, I'm thinking like ghost hunters type stuff, and
I didn't get that.
and then what you're trying to and then what you're trying to do is, it's just like you're getting to do this like detective kind of like puzzle work to be like, okay, can I validate it? Is there enough there? And then, oh yeah, by the way, is it tied in any way to, the war tale, to some kind of military, aspect or component?
Yes, and honestly, it's like my old Army intelligence training. That's really kind of the same way I approached the book. When I worked at like G2 level, I was at what's called an all source production section. And, you kind of collect intelligence from every source, from satellite, human agents, foreign newspapers, everything, put it together. That's kind of the same approach. When I'd find a story, I'd try to find some more background on it. Was there any local lore that would go with that? And then if it was an individual, try to track that person down if I could, to try to talk to them in person, which was difficult. We only got that a few times successfully, but yeah, I try to, vet the stories, really look at that they had some legitimacy to them, or I didn't.
Right. What about as far as like unexplained? Is there anything that jumps out that's like, yeah, like we just like this is a clear, like this one just doesn't make sense?
I mean, honestly, the book's full of them, right? One of the scariest stories that kind of stuck with me, because I actually knew this veteran, so it was actually a personal story that he told me that he honestly had never told anyone before, because he didn't want anyone to think he was crazy. So he was in the 82nd Airborne, and when they jumped into Salerno, Italy in World War II, there's a jump called the oil drum drop, because they kind of lit up 50-gallon barrels of oil on the beach for them to know where the drop zone was. So when they landed, it's a pretty intense firefight, kind of lasted all night. He's on the ground, and at some point he looks up in the tree above him. He sees another paratrooper, basically, that's tangled up in that tree, kind of, suspended in air. And he hears this guy say, "Please help me." So he tells him, I am going to help you, buddy, as soon as I can, as soon as basically the shooting stops and I can get to you. So it's, it's all through the night. This firefight's kind of going on, and he can't really move from this position. And throughout the night, he hears this guy say, "Please help me, please help me." And so when the morning comes and it's finally quieted down, and like guys are starting to come out of their holes and stuff. You know, he looks up, and in the dawn light, he sees it was nearly, you know, it would have been impossible for this guy to have been alive and saying anything to him, because his neck was broken and he was tangled up in the chute. So like, you know, just goosebumps. And my friend Emil climbed up and cut him down like he promised, and he kept that story to himself all his life, because he, you know, wasn't even sure, you know, did it happen? Was it in his mind? You know, but yeah, that story kind of, you know, that was one that it really stayed with me for sure.
Yeah, it makes you. No, it makes you wonder. Like, was it the trauma of the situation and the quickness of the passing?
Yes.
Just kind of not know that he was not with his body anymore.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So, Haunted War Tales, True Military Encounters. Where can we find this book? I know it's on Amazon. I have mine pre-ordered, or I have mine ordered on order.
Thank you.
So, are you doing an audio version by chance?
The publisher says there will be an audio version coming, but I'm not sure when. But it's available everywhere. I'm not trying to sell them myself necessarily. I really like to recommend, if you want it, you know, to go to your independent local bookstore to help out a local business.
I like small businesses.
Yeah, and order it through them, and then hopefully they'll order another copy too, right? To put it on the shelf once they see that someone's interested in it. So that's what I've been telling people: support those local businesses and booksellers.
Are you going to have it at the NEX and the BX and the PX?
It's supposed to be, and I sure hope so. I sure hope so. The publisher said it would be. Cool. But you can find me like Instagram at RC Warrior Poet, or on Facebook, it's just RC Bramhall.
Awesome. Anything that we haven't covered yet?
I mean, you know, there's lots of, basically the different chapters are different subjects. So kind of first chapter is like hairy hominids, Sasquatch, and international though. Second one is kind of animal attacks, like real things, insects. You know, I was bitten by a black widow when I was in the Army. So I kind of opened the chapter talking about that, you know, people don't realize that those are threats too when we're out in the bush, that, you know, reptiles and insects and things can get you. So, you know, tiger attacks in Vietnam, pretty wild stuff. Crocodiles against the Japanese in World War II, insane story, like something like over 400 Japanese soldiers eaten by these saltwater crocodiles on this one island.
God.
Trying to cross a mangrove swamp. It was like a 10-mile journey.
It's like Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
That's
you know, and it happened a few months right before the USS Indianapolis. You know, so everyone knows that story from Jaws with the sharks, but no one knows that this actually something similar happened to the Japanese, and it was crocodiles.
Oh man.
And then there's also, you know, kind of the bizarre, you know, real history, like Nazis and the occult stuff. Really get into that, some of the really weird things that they were doing. Japanese cannibalism, ritualistic cannibalism, our POWs in World War II.
What?
Really wild. So yeah, all that stuff came out. It was kept secret because they didn't want families to know, obviously. So that all came out in like the 2000s. And
really?
Yes, and believe it or not, President Bush, Daddy Bush, would have been eaten.
What?
Yes, his unit, like one of the bombing runs he went on, he was the only survivor that got away. And all the other guys that were shot down, it came out that they were all cannibalized.
Oh,
and
God.
he found this out later
That's
in
grim.
life. It's a wild
grim.
We look at Army psy-ops, our own psy-ops, and some of the wild stuff we've done. The Hucks in the Philippines, we kind of set them up and made them believe that there were vampires in the jungle, and it worked.
What?
Yeah, in Vietnam.
I'm really excited to get my hands on this book.
And that's my goal, is like, you know, there's so much stuff in there. No matter what way you're coming in, I really think you'll find it interesting, you know.
Do you think there's any chance that you're going to do like a television series with this? Please tell me carry this
well,
up.
it's definitely possible. Actually, because I was a screenwriter for years, so I have a few connections. One of the producers I work with is currently considering it. Yeah, so we'll see. Because it would make a great like docu-series, you know.
I would tune in.
Yes.
Sure.
But yeah, going back to Vietnam, we used what was called the ghost tapes. So we used, again, like kind of the Buddhist beliefs that if you're killed away from home and your body's never brought back home, you're doomed to like wander the earth forever as a spirit. So Army psy-ops, we used those. We created these tapes where like ghosts were talking to the Viet Cong, and we broadcast them through the jungle at night.
Ooh, that's diabolical.
Yeah.
That can really twist your head.
And then there's the chapter on hauntings, and then another chapter on like monsters, like cryptids, you know, all the way from like dogmen to like jinn, you know, like the genies in the Middle East. And then the final chapter, domestic disturbances, I kind of just went around the nation and picked, I think, about 10 bases and look at each base because, you know, every base has its own kind of legends and ghost stories and, you know, Bigfoot sightings. So yeah, so it's pretty complete. And like I say, if you're into paranormal, if you're into Bigfoot stuff, if you're just a military historian, it's got everything in there for you. So
I love it.
awesome.
Well, RSC, thank you so much for sharing these incredible stories. I can't wait to get my book and read the rest of them. Although I'm a little scared.
You're a little scared?
A little bit.
Well, that's the idea. Hopefully it'll creep you out a little bit, right?
Yeah.
RC, thanks so much. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to shout out to my post 361 in Ennis, Texas. And then also I wanted to shout out that I was at a writer's residency in Chapala, Mexico when I was writing this book. And, you know, we have an American Legion post in Chapala, Mexico. It's post number 7. So also shouts out to them because I actually wrote part of the book while I was visiting Chapala and living there.
That's awesome. Are you going to be at the convention in New Orleans later this year?
You know what? I'm considering it. Yes.
Please come and do a live reading with us. We're going to be doing a podcast live from the convention, and we want you to come join us.
Oh, I would love it. I'll take that as a formal invitation.
Yes, please.
Awesome.
All right, RC, thanks so much for visiting us today. Alpha, stick around for some Scuttlebutt after the break.
All right. It was an honor. Thank you.
The American Legion is raising awareness about PTSD and veteran suicide by offering hope, camaraderie, and support.
Be the one to help end veteran suicide.
Be the one to save one veteran.
Be the one to ask a veteran in your life how they're doing.
Be the one to reach out when a veteran is struggling.
Go to betheone.org and help the American Legion end veteran suicide.
Will you be the one?
Okay, alphas. I hope you're not too scared after all of that. We hope you had a good break. We hope you caught your breath. Now it's time for a little scuttlebutt. Adam?
Marine Corps veteran Alvin Gauthier, who served in Iraq in 2003, was going about his workday as a postal carrier in Grand Prairie, Texas, shot out to the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex when he came across a series of loose letters signed by someone named Marion Lamb, written between 1942 and 1944 in his parcel hamper. Included among them was a tattered envelope postmarked 1942 addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Harvey Lamb, Jacksonville, Arkansas, and stamped with U.S. Army Postal Service. Gauthier had no idea where the letters came from, but remembering his overseas deployments, felt a personal connection to the wartime letters and knew that what they would mean to the writer's loved ones. I had to find the family, he said. He began a search and found Marion Lamb's 2010 obituary. So he reached out to KARK-TV in Arkansas for help locating relatives. Minutes after the story about the letters aired, Joanne Smith's phone in Jacksonville, Arkansas began to ring. The last of the 6 Lamb siblings, Marion Lamb's sister, contacted Gauthier, and the 2 of them bonded during a long phone call, which ended in his promise to hand deliver the letters to her. On his next day off, Alvin Gauthier drove 5 hours to deliver the 8 letters to the Smith family. Lamb's nieces and nephews joined their mother to read the letters and visit with Alvin. Since the visit, he has maintained daily contact with them, and Joanne is planning a summer visit to Grand Prairie to visit Alvin. What do you think, Stacy, about this postal worker's dedication. And what would you do if you found letters from 1942 in your mail sack?
I would probably do the exact same thing. I would go down a path of research trying to find where the letters belong to. I don't care. I think of what's the Tom Hanks flick where he gets in a plane crash and is determined to deliver that package to the welder gal, the artist or whatever. Anyway, it doesn't matter if it's been through a plane crash or tucked between the seats of a truck. That letter's got to get to where it's got to go. I'm curious though. What did the letter say?
Well, it turns out that the letters were not lost in the postal system for the past 80 years. Relief. One of the Smith cousins had the parcel stored for several years and was shipping them to another cousin who was compiling a family history. The shipping parcel was overfilled. Now we get to the bottom of the story. One of the seals was broken and the letters slipped out. Not, I've been delivering mail for the last 80 years. And hold on, what are these 2 envelopes I've never delivered?
I see. All right.
Which makes more sense. But that doesn't lessen the valiant efforts to make sure the mail was delivered. And yes, Stacy, what was in the letters? We don't know.
Well,
but
hopefully like marriage proposals and all that good fun, heartwarming stuff.
I love you. I miss you. How are you doing?
Something definitely not a Dear John letter.
But it's like everything else. It's an attachment, it's a memory, and it means something, no matter what the contents were, because it's a representation. So really cool to be able to do that, to do the work and put in the extra effort to deliver something that may be meaningful to somebody.
Yeah, great job, Alvin.
Yeah, great story. All right, so we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, and it's my turn to share with you. Adam, I know you're well aware of my fixation with Reddit, and I have to get on there to go down some rabbit holes. Well, this week is a good one for you alphas. At War College asked a question on Reddit asking, what exactly makes the U.S. military so powerful and effective? There were no less than 142 respondents. And here are just a few of the highlights, ones that I think are worth mentioning, in my opinion. At Born to Sweet Delight said in part, and plus that handle, by the way, let's just give a nod to that, said, quote, the U.S. Strategists are aware that the U.S. military doesn't lose wars. Wars are lost by bad ratings in the polls. So the U.S. strategy, the U.S. quote, way of making war, end quote, is based on 2 core concepts. Do it quick. A long war is a ratings drag. And 2, do it cheap. Money we have in spades, blood looks bad coming out of U.S. personnel on TV. So at Control the Alt Delete said, USA as a culture is very much individualists with the concept of independent thought pervading just about every aspect of our society. This may seem to run counter to the concept of an organization that relies on a couple strands of yarn, meaning thou shalt do what I say, but in actuality, that individualist streak tends to provide a critically important flair to every aspect of the military. That amazing logistics breaks down somewhere. Private Schmuckatelli can think up a workaround or bitch to leadership where every single layer will kill themselves thinking up some way to make the problem go away. That fancy new gadget not working right, duct tape and a matchstick, and they will get it into something that functions. The plan fall apart because it was never good to begin with. F that noise. We got a new plan, and it's called what we're going with right now. Certain other societies encourage a culture that does not think independently, critically, or with initiative, unless you are permitted to do so, usually because of non-meritocratic. This is meritocracy, meritocratic reasons. That's a word, isn't it? Non-meritocratic reasons. Whoever's on Reddit writing this up is like really thinking about it. Anyway, they go on to say, the concept of not being in control is terrifying to the leaders of those societies. And as such, they indoctrinate their citizens at the earliest timelines to make them unable to deal with rapidly changing environments that require immediate response, or at least put them at a disadvantage when compared to those who've been living their entire lives that way. Americans. This is all well and fine for peacetime, but when timelines compress to seconds, having the fastest and most reliable thinkers on the front lines, Americans, is a massive advantage. At Sir Sinalot, I love this. Sir Sinalot said, any military that has a surplus to send fast food restaurants to a base half a world away should be feared. I agree with you, Sir Sinalot.
That's it.
If you can get McDonald's to the front before the rest of the army, by golly, we must be feared. This is my favorite quote. Alphas, what do you think? What makes our American military the best? Adam, what's your thoughts?
Well, one, the Apache. Two,
of course.
I mean, that's where like the conventional, like, military minded like male goes to, is like our firepower, our weapons, our machines, But I like the spirit of, I think, what Control of Alt Delete said in 12 paragraphs, which was essentially like, it's the ingenuity of the American spirit and the mind, being able to be, creative and think outside the box. And yeah, I think that really is like one of the greatest resources, not just our military. I mean, it's a human thing, but yeah, there's a cultural thing there that says within these bounds, like if it's not going to work, then I'm going to be able to do like whatever it takes. You'd be surprised in some of the Asian military cultures. It's following the rigid doctrine and process to a T and never deviating from it. So we did actually see this like in how the Taiwanese or some of our, Asian coalition partners would fly and operate their aircraft, and they would not take on some of the risks and things that American pilots would, to maybe be able to achieve some greater outcome, because it was deviating from kind of like what the conventional norm was of how they were going to operate. So, I'm trying to say very nicely that it's like, kind of the Western gung-ho cowboy style of the American can be dangerous at times, but it can also be very advantageous and one of our greatest, benefits.
Yeah. So essentially what you're saying is, because we're all MacGyvers, that's what makes us great.
That's right. That's right. Okay, then Sergeant Brett Meal saw one of his students inadvertently activate a grenade during Marine infantry training, as one does, in June 2023. He yelled at him to toss the grenade into the target area. I'm sure he yelled it very calmly, but the student froze with fear. In between the 3 seconds and 5 seconds, the grenade would have exploded in the young Marine's hand. Meal yanked the student out of the training pit and swatted the grenade out of his hand. Unfortunately, it bounced off the wall and landed near the two of them. So Meal covered the student with his body and prepared to die. He was sad for his wife, whom he had married just 11 days prior. Meal, 26, who survived the blast with extensive injuries, said in an interview with Marine Corps Times he acted out of a sense of obligation to his students. I look at these students as like my little brothers, said Meal, who now is a staff sergeant. He had 20 pieces of shrapnel throughout his body, including 2 in his nostrils and a severe traumatic brain injury, he said. It should have taken him about a year to recover. But with support from his wife and his leaders, and with an array of therapies, Meal was back training infantry students within 6 months. In March, the United Service Organizations named Meal its Marine of the Year, and his command also put him forward for a Navy and Marine Corps Medal, the Corps' top award for non-combat heroism.
I have to have some clarity here. I'm assuming that when they say student, because when I first heard you say that student, I was thinking of like a junior ROTC cadet student. But what you're saying is like a Marine Corps recruit, not a student.
Yeah, I think that's what it's talking about.
Okay.
That's how I took it to mean that a recruit during whatever the basic, period of training, during Marine infantry training,
Right. Okay.
had this where they're going through standard, pull the pin, go into their
Yeah.
proper position, do the lob, and within that he froze with fear and he just had to react and make a decision. And that's where like the true values of being a Marine
Mm-hmm.
took over. And regardless that it was a recruit or that it was training none of that stuff mattered. It was about trying to overcome the situation. Oh, I'm going to hit this grenade and I'm going to throw my body on. Unfortunately, like I've taken shrapnel all over my body.
My
It's quite
gosh. And
heroic.
to go through that effort of like just in seconds grabbing it and tossing it and only to have it ricochet back at you. That sucks.
Yeah.
But I mean, he did the valiant thing and jumped on the kid. So I'm
And
glad.
there's no time to think about it.
No.
Like you're just reacting in that
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah. So his instincts are obviously definitely that of a fearless individual. So, well, I'm glad you're recovering, Sergeant Meal. Congratulations on your promotion and, of course, a very well-deserved honor. I'm glad the Marine Corps is recognizing that. Okay, Alphas, if you got a scary, crazy, off the wall, doesn't matter if it's paranormal or whatever, story from your time in service, drop us a line because we're listening and we want to hear it from you. In the meantime, don't forget, our friend Joe is somewhere in Vietnam doing some rock checking, and he'll be back soon. But
And he will be for some time.
allegedly. But subscribe to the show and the podcast, and we will let you know when Joe's back. You can also subscribe to the newsletter. Send us that email with your scary stories, crazy and bizarre stories. Get that book. Share some guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. Adam, I will see you very, very soon. Alphas, we'll see you next week.